Hey guys, today we're talking about what life was like for a guard posted outside a dragon's chamber.
If you like these videos, make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're listening from.
Are you about to fall asleep, trying to work, or maybe on a long drive somewhere? So, it's the late medieval period. In this particular castle, no one's especially concerned with the exact year not down in the guardroom anyway. Time here is measured in meals, changeovers, and whether or not the kitchen is out of salted pork again. And you've been given one of those assignments that sounds exciting until you actually have to do it. Standing guard outside the dragon's chamber. Now, Dragon Guard has a certain ring to it. Makes you think of shining armor, heroic deeds, maybe an occasional fiery battle. In reality, most of your day is spent standing still, shuffling your feet to keep the blood flowing, watching a door that if everything goes according to plan, you will never see open. The chamber lies deep in the fortress.
To reach it, you walk down a corridor that winds just enough to make you lose your bearings.
The walls here are thick stone, darkened in patches from centuries of torch smoke. The torches themselves are spaced far apart, which means there are long stretches of shadow where the light fades into a warm blur before it flares up again at the next flame. The air is always warm here, even in the dead of winter. Not the dry, sharp warmth of a hearth fire, but a slow, steady heat that seeps through the soles of your boots and into your bones.
You can almost imagine the floor is alive, breathing heat up into your feet.
And maybe, in a way, it is. The smell is distinctive, warm rock, old smoke.
And underneath it, a metallic tang that you can never quite pin down.
Like copper coins left in the sun, or blood that's long since dried.
Some guards say that's the treasure. Others say it's the dragon's breath. You stop thinking about it after a few weeks, or you try to.
The scent becomes part of you, clinging to your hair, your armor, even your skin. The door you watch is enormous, oak so old it's almost black, banded with thick strips of iron. The hinges are thick enough to hold up a city gate. You've never seen them move. You've never wanted to see them move.
Your orders are straightforward. Do not go in. Do not let anyone else go in. And under no circumstances open the door. Not even a little. Not even to check if the dragon's still in there.
If the door begins to rattle, and you retold this in the same casual tone one might use to tell you where to find a spare bucket, you are to sprint for the bell tower and ring the alarm.
No one tells you what happens after that.
You have your suspicions.
None of them are comforting. At first, the job is unnerving.
You jump at every noise, the creak of the wood, the shift of your own armor, the drip of water from some hidden crack above. But the dragon itself is a quiet neighbor. Most of the time, days can pass without a sound from inside.
You begin to wonder if it's sleeping,
or if it's even still alive. Not that you're tempted to check, but every so often, there's a reminder. Sometimes it's a low, steady rumble that you feel through the soles of your feet before you hear it in your ears. Sometimes it's a heavy thud, like a stone falling, except stones don't breathe afterwards. Once, you heard a long, slow exhale that made the torches in the hallway flicker and dance.
You tell yourself it was just a moving through old tunnels. You don't believe yourself. Then there are the nights when the heat grows stronger, and you catch the faintest shimmer of it in the air just above the floor.
On those nights, the smell of metal sharpens, and you find yourself staring at the iron bands across the door, wondering if they're truly as strong as everyone says.
Hours pass slowly in the dragon corridor. You find ways to fill the time, counting the cracks between the floor stones, tracing the patterns of soot on the wall, listening for footsteps that never come.
Sometimes you talk to the other guard, if you're lucky enough to have company on your shift. Conversation drifts to anything but the dragon.
You both pretend it isn't there.
Yet, for all the stillness, the job changes you.
You become attuned to tiny shifts in the air, subtle changes in temperature, the faintest scrape of claw against stone.
You start to notice patterns, like how the dragon seems more restless when it rains above, as if it can sense the weather through the earth, or how the warmth fades a little after a big feast day in the castle, when the kitchens have been working overtime. And you realize something important. The dragon is listening too. It must be. No creature can live this close to the heartbeat of a castle and not hear the life going on beyond its door. Somewhere in there, beneath the heat and the treasure and the scales, it knows you're here. Whether the thought is comforting or not, well, that depends on the day. If there's one thing you learn quickly, standing outside a dragon's chamber, it's that sound becomes your entire world. Not sight the door blocks that. Not smell, though the warm, metallic scent of the corridor is constant.
Not touch except for the weight of the spear in your hand and the slow ache in your feet. No, what keeps you alert is sound.
Every small noise, every faint shift in the air, every echo from behind the thick oak door becomes a clue, a signal, maybe even a warning.
At first, the noises are indistinct. On your first few shifts, you can tell the difference between the soft crackle of torch flames and the whisper of air from under the door. Every sound feels like it could be important.
Your ears strain to separate them, but the stone walls carry noise in strange ways,
turning a simple thud into something that feels like it's coming from everywhere at once. But after a while, you start to notice patterns.
There's the deep, low rumble, the kind you feel more than hear.
It comes irregularly, like distant thunder.
Sometimes it's steady for a minute or two, other times it pulses in short bursts.
You've decided this must be the dragon breathing while it sleeps, chest rising and falling in long, deliberate waves.
The vibration creeps up through the floor and settles in your legs, a reminder that whatever is inside isn't just alive, it's fast. Then there's the scrape.
It is faint but unmistakable once you've heard it a few times. The sound of something hard, maybe claws, dragging across stone.
Sometimes it's slow, deliberate, like it's tracing the lines in the floor.
Other times it's a quick scuff, as though the dragon shifted its weight unexpectedly.
You imagine talons leaving shallow grooves in the rock, marks that no one would ever see. And then there's pacing.
This one is almost comforting, in a strange way.
Every so often, you'll catch the rhythm of measured steps, claws clicking softly on stone, one after the other, back and forth.
It's slow, steady, predictable, as though the dragon is marking time or keeping itself occupied. You picture it circling its hoard, tail curling lazily behind, eyes half closed. The idea that something so dangerous could pace like a bored soldier makes you almost laugh.
Almost. Occasionally, there are sounds that defy explanation. Once, in the middle of an otherwise quiet afternoon shift, you heard a hollow metallic clang, deep and resonant, as though a massive gong had been struck. It came from behind the door,
followed by a silence so heavy you wondered if you'd imagined it.
Another time, there was a sound like rushing wind, only it didn't fade away like wind should. It grew louder, then stopped abruptly, leaving your ears ringing in the stillness. And then, on one unforgettable night, there was humming. Soft, low, almost melodic, the kind of tune you hum without thinking when you're working alone.
At first, you thought it was another guard further up the hall.
But the sound was coming from the other side of the door. The dragon humming.
You never told anyone. Some things are easier to keep to yourself.
Of course, not every sound comes from the dragon.
The castle above is alive with its own noises. The shuffle of servants, the clatter of dishes, the muffled voices of guards changing shifts.
Sometimes those sounds drift down the stairs, mixing with the warmth and the shadows until you can't tell where the castle ends and the chamber begins. And then there are the visitors.
Most people who find themselves in this corridor aren't supposed to be here.
Treasure hunters, mostly young, overconfident, and convinced they're the first ones to think of it.
You hear them long before you see them. The careful, quiet steps that aren't nearly as quiet as they think. The whispering arguments about which way to go. The faint metallic jingle of gear they forgot to secure.
You let them get just close enough to see the door before you step into view. The look on their faces when they realize there's a guard, and that the guard knows exactly what they were here for is always the same. Wide-eyed, caught between fear and embarrassment. Some leave without a word, others try to bluff their way through, claiming they were just looking for the kitchens, or taking a wrong turn.
You've learned not to waste time arguing.
You just point them back the way they came and watch until they disappear up the stairs.
And every now and then, someone tries to push past.
It never goes well for them.
You've trained yourself to hear the difference between someone reaching for a handshake and someone reaching for a weapon.
The moment that sound reaches you, the faint swish of cloth, the shift of weight on the floor, your spear is in your hand and the intruder is backing away.
You don't have to hurt anyone. The thought of what's behind the door is usually enough.
The thing about standing guard here is that you start to think of the sounds as your own. The deep rumble, the scrape of claws, the quiet pacing, they become as familiar as the creak of your own armor.
You know them in the same way you know the sound of rain on the roof or the wind through the trees.
And just as you'd notice the absence of those sounds, you know you'd notice if the dragon feels silent. Sometimes you wonder if it's the same for the dragon. Maybe it knows the way your boots sound when you shift your stance. Maybe it can tell the difference between your breathing and the breathing of another guard. Maybe it even notices when you hum under your breath on the long night shifts, and hums back in its own low, rumbling way. It's a strange sort of relationship. You never see each other, never speak, never touch, but you're aware of one another always. The sounds behind the door and the sounds in front of it weaving together into a quiet, constant exchange.
and in that steady rhythm of noise and silence, you begin to feel something unexpected. Not fear, not exactly.
More like companionship. On your very first shift, you might not even realize where it's coming from.
You'll step into the corridor and feel it wrap around you like a blanket, and your first thought might be, "Oh, that's nice they keep it warm down here." But as you walk the length of the hall, past the torches and the long shadows between them, you notice the air grows warmer the closer you get to the door. The change is subtle at first, a few degrees, perhaps, but then it's undeniable. And it's not just warmth.
There's weight to it, a density, as though the air itself is carrying something heavy and invisible.
It presses softly against your skin, settles into your clothes, lingers in your hair.
By the time you reach your post, the warmth is all around you, and you can't help but think, this is the dragons doing dot in winter. It's a blessing.
The upper halls of the castle can be drafty, the kind of cold that nips at your fingers and makes your breath curl in the air. Down here, you never see your breath. Your fingers never go numb.
The stone under your boots never feels icy. On those days, the other guards envy your post.
At least you're warm, they say, stamping their feet in the courtyard.
And you nod, because it's true. But warmth isn't the whole story dot in summer. It's a different matter.
The warmth that feels like comfort in January becomes something heavier in July.
The air feels thick.
Your armor heats slowly until it feels like you've been standing too close to a forge.
You start shifting your stands more often, trying
to let a little air reach your back. There's no breeze here, no relief.
The warmth is constant, unyielding.
You can't open a window. You can't fan yourself without drawing attention. You just have to breathe it in and wait for your shift
to end. The smell changes with the heat. On cooler days, it's subtle warm stone, faintly metallic, with the soft, dry scent of the torches.
But when the dragon stirs and the heat climbs a little higher, the air changes.
The metallic scent grows sharper, mixing with something smokier.
Something that prickles faintly at the back of your throat.
It's not unpleasant, exactly, but it's strong enough to remind you that you're not just standing outside an ordinary door. Some guards describe it as the smell of hot iron. Others say it's like gold coins warmed in the sun.
You've heard one old veteran claim it smells like a storm about to break that's strange. Charred scent you catch just before the rain starts to fall.
You've never been able to decide which is most accurate.
The truth is, it smells like
the dragon, and the heat is not constant in its intensity.
It ebbs and flows subtly but perceptibly. Some days, it's steady and even, like the warmth of a stone wall that's been holding sunlight all afternoon. Other days, it pulses.
You'll
be standing there, your spear resting against your shoulder, when you feel it rise not by much, just a degree or two, and you think it's awake.
Then, after a while, it fades again, and you think it's sleeping. You learn to read the dragon's moods through the temperature of the air. You pass the time by watching how the heat shapes the corridor. The light from the torches wavers in, the rising air, bending the shadows, making them ripple and blur. If you stand very still and let your eyes unfocus, you can almost imagine the air itself is moving in slow currents, swirling lazily between you and the door. The iron bands across the wood seem to shimmer faintly, as if they're glowing from within. On the longest shifts, you find yourself mesmerized by these tiny movements. The bend of a shadow, the flicker of a flame, the slow rise of heat from the floor.
You count them in your head, mark them like the ticks of a clock. It's a way to measure time without looking at the sun, without glancing toward the upper halls. Down here, the world beyond the corridor might as well not exist. Sometimes you imagine what it must be like inside.
If it's this warm here, what must it be like to stand in the center of the chamber, surrounded on all sides by treasure and stone and the dragon itself?
You picture the gold piled high, the gems glinting in the dim light, the air shimmering with heat.
You imagine the dragon curled among it all, its scales radiating warmth,
each slow breath turning the air thicker and heavier. You've heard tales of dragons sleeping for decades, even centuries, their bodies keeping the chamber warm all the while. You wonder if that's what's happening now. You wonder if you've ever been here on a day when it really woke and stretched its wings.
Would the heat grow unbearable? Would it pour through the cracks around the door like steam from a boiling kettle? You hope you never find out. The heat has a way of getting into your thoughts. On quiet nights, you catch yourself thinking about fires you've known. The small cooking fire in your mother's kitchen, the bonfires on festival days, the forge in the blacksmith shop. Each has its own smell, its own color, its own personality. This heat is different from all of them.
It's alive. It's constant.
It has nothing to do with wood or coal. There are old superstitions about it, whispered among the guards during changeover. Some say the warmth makes you stronger if you stand in it long enough. Others claim it's slowly turning you into something tougher, harder to burn, more resistant to flame.
And there are those who believe it's dangerous that breathing
this air for too many years will change you in ways you can't see.
They speak of guards who left the post after a decade and found the cold unbearable, who wrapped themselves in blankets even in summer, who swore they could feel the dragon's heartbeat in their own chest. You don't know what to make of such stories.
You only know that the heat has become part of your life, as familiar as the weight of your armor or the sound of your own footsteps on the stone floor. You notice it when it's gone on the rare days when you're posted elsewhere, and you miss it in a way that surprises you. The warmth also changes how you hear things. On the hottest days, the air feels thicker, and sounds seem closer, sharper. The crackle of the torches is louder. The faint creak of the door carries more weight. Even your breathing seems amplified. Each inhale and exhale more present in your ears.
You become aware of your own body in a way you aren't in cooler air, and perhaps though you'd never say it aloud, you think the dragon notices the changes too.
Maybe it knows when they're outside its chamber grows heavy and still. Maybe
it can tell, just from the heat in the corridor, whether you are calm or restless, whether you stand close to the door or keep your distance. Maybe it knows more about you than you know about it. The thought is unsettling,
but not entirely unpleasant. Be why at the end of a long shift, you've stopped fighting the heat. You've let it in.
It's wrapped itself around you like a slow-moving
tide, and you carry it with you when you leave. Even in the cooler air of the upper halls, you can still feel it on your skin, in your clothes, in your hair.
And when you lie down to sleep, sometimes you think you can still feel it, as though
the dragon's warmth has followed you home. The heat of the corridor has a way of making you forget the world beyond the door,
until someone comes along to remind you it exists.
And when they do, you can always tell long before they reach you. It starts with the changing sound. On a normal shift, the corridor is yours. The slow pop and crackle of torches, the faint tick of settling stone, the almost imaginary hiss of heat drifting from under the door, these are the sounds you live with hour after hour.
But when someone is approaching, the air itself changes. You hear their footsteps in the long stairwell leading down, quick and uncertain, or slow and deliberate, depending on what kind of person they are. You'd think people coming toward a dragon's chamber would all tread carefully, but they don't.
Some clatter like they own the place, metal on stone, their voices echoing before they're even halfway down. Others think they're being stealthy, trying to soften their boots on the flagstones. But it is trained in this corridor. Their steps sound like trumpets. The brave ones or the fools often talk as they come. Whispered plans, whispered
arguments. You can catch whole fragments if you stand still and tilt your head just right.
Told you the guard was just a rumor. Or, it'll be asleep. We'll be in and out. That sort of talk never ends the way they think it. Well, the cautious ones arrive differently. You can hear them stop halfway down the stairs, listen for a while, and then continue, one slow step at a time.
Their breathing is shallow by the time they reach the corridor. You can almost feel the tension radiating from them. Then there are the locals. These are the castle folk who have no business here, but wander town all the same.
Servants sent on errands who took the wrong turn.
Apprentices who heard the stories and decided to see for themselves.
Once, a cook's boy came all the way down carrying a tray of bread rolls, insisting he'd been told to deliver them to the man with the key. You deal with each kind of visitor differently. The brash ones, the self-proclaimed dragon slayers. The treasure hunters, the would-be heroes, are often the easiest to read.
They march up expecting the corridor to be empty, and when they see you, they try to talk their way past. Sometimes they demand entry, as if saying it loudly enough will make you step aside.
Sometimes they try to joke, to charm their way in. You've
learned to let them talk themselves out.
Just stand there, spear in hand,
and let the silence answer for you.
It's remarkable how quickly confidence drains away when you don't give it anything to push against. They shift from one foot to the other. They clear their throats. They start glancing toward the stairs.
Eventually they leave.
They always do. The cautious ones are different.
They already half regret coming here before they've even seen the door. When you step forward to block their path, they flinch like they've been caught stealing. You don't even have to raise your voice. A simple, "You shouldn't be here," is enough to send them back the way they came, heads down, steps quickening with every pace toward the safety of the upper halls. And then there are the curious. These are the most dangerous, in their way, because they aren't here for gold or glory, they're here for answers. They want to know what's behind the door. They ask questions in that soft, insistent tone that makes you think of dripping water wearing away stone.
How big is it, really? Do you ever hear it breathe?
Has anyone gone in?
And come out again?
You never tell them much.
Not because you're ordered not to, though you are, but because you've come to believe the mystery is part of the magic. If they knew exactly what waited inside, the door might lose some of its power.
And besides, you only know half the truth yourself.
The rest is rumor, and rumor is a dangerous thing in a place like this. Sometimes, of course, you get actual intruders, not visitors, not curious wanderers, but people determined to force their way through. Those are the rare moments when the stillness of the corridor breaks like glass.
You see the intent in their eyes before they even move. The tightening of shoulders, the way their hands hover near sword hilts or tools. The first rule is to let them see your spear. The second is to let them see you're not afraid to use it.
Most stop there, the truly reckless.
Well, they never get close enough to touch the door.
The captain is very clear about that. You remember each one. There was the man in patched leather who came alone, eyes wide with something halfway between desperation and madness. He didn't speak a word, just drew a knife and rushed. You stepped aside, tripped him with the haft of your spear, and he hit the floor so hard his breath left him in a single ragged gasp.
When he could stand again, you sent him back up the
stairs, the echo of his boots fading into silence. Another time, a pair of brothers came down together, armed with crossbows. They moved in perfect unison, step for step, eyes darting toward the shadows as if expecting the dragon to appear in the corridor itself. You stopped them 10 paces from the door. They argued not with you, but with each other until one
finally turned and left, the other following reluctantly.
You never saw them again. And then there was the woman in the green cloak. She didn't carry a weapon. She didn't look frightened.
She just stood a few steps away from you and asked,
very politely, if she could see the dragon.
You told her no. She nodded once, turned, and walked away.
For weeks afterward, you found yourself listening for her footsteps, though they never came again. The regulars, the other guards, have their own stories.
You swapped them during changeovers, half-truths and outright inventions mixing with
the real encounters until you can't quite remember which are which. There's the one about the thief who tried to sneak in through the ceiling, only to land in the dragon's lap. There's the tale of the bard who thought to soothe the dragon with song, and was never heard from again. Some nights, you imagine what it would be like if you weren't here. Would the intruders make it to the door? Would they try to open it?
Would the dragon let them?
You picture it sometimes. The iron hinges groaning, the door swinging wide, the wave of heat and scent rolling into the corridor.
You imagine the look on the intruder's face as they see what's inside.
You imagine their last thought, and you wonder if it would be all regret. But that's not your job. Your job is to make sure it never happens, and so you stand, and you listen, and you send them away.
There comes a point in every long watch when the stillness of the corridor stops being something you notice and becomes something you carry with you.
It's not that the corridor itself has changed. The torches still burn with that same slow, steady crackle. The shadows still stretch long and soft against the stone, but you have changed in ways so gradual you didn't feel them happening. The way a stone becomes smooth after years in a stream. When you first took the
post, you thought the work was all about vigilance.
Eyes fixed on the door, ears straining for the scrape of iron on stone, the deep rumble of a hinge moving, or a sound from within that would mean
something important, something dangerous.
You stood straight, hand tight on your spear, ready for a moment you could imagine in vivid detail, but had never actually seen. Weeks passed, then months, and that imagined moment never came.
The door stayed closed.
The dragon, if it was awake, kept its thoughts and movements to itself.
And so your attention shifted. At first, it wandered reluctantly, darting back to the door every few seconds like a bird tethered by a thin string.
But over time, the string slackened. You began to notice other things. The way the heat from behind the door drifted upward, curling around your knees before rising to your shoulders. The faint streak of lighter stone along the left wall where countless fingertips had brushed over the centuries.
The tiny groove at the edge of one flagstone that your boot found automatically when you shifted your weight. Little things, small and constant. You found that they comforted you.
The longer you stood in that corridor, the more those details became anchors. You learned the rhythm of the torches, how long they burned before one needed replacing. The exact moment when the flame leaned and flared before returning to steady
light.
You could tell the time of day by the air itself. Cooler in the early hours, faintly sharper by mid-afternoon, softer and heavier at night.
When new guards took their first shifts here, they fidgeted. They coughed, shuffled, tapped the butt of their spears against the floor.
They craned their necks toward the door as though expecting it to burst open at any second. You used to be like that.
Now, you could stand motionless for an hour and think.
Nothing of it.
Stillness had stopped being a strain and started being a kind of rest, and somewhere along the way, you realized that you were no longer just guarding the door, you were sharing the corridor with the dragon.
You couldn't see.
It couldn't hear it most days, but its presence was in everything. In the heat, in the faint metallic scent in the air, in the slow, unspoken sense that you were not alone. You began to think of it less as a beast locked away and more as, well, not a companion exactly, but something closer to a neighbor. A neighbor you'd never met, whose face you didn't know, but whose habits you were intimately familiar with. You knew when it was restless. You knew when it had settled. You could feel its moods in the air on some nights, especially in winter when the upper halls were cold and the corridor felt almost too warm. You would let yourself imagine it sleeping just beyond the door, its sides rising and falling in a slow rhythm.
You imagined the glow of banked firelight on the scales of its chest, the faint shimmer of heat above its form. You imagined, though you would never say it aloud, that it might know you were there, that it might recognize your tread, your
scent, the quiet way you leaned your spear against the wall when you were certain no one was looking. You never spoke to it, of course. That would be foolish. And yet, in the long hours when no visitors came and the torches hummed in their brackets, you sometimes found yourself thinking thoughts as if you were speaking to it, not in words, but in a kind of mental offering, the way you might think toward a mountain or a river that's been part of your life for as long as you can remember. You told it about the changing weather in the courtyard above, about the early frost on the training field, about the feast that had just passed and the one that was coming.
You told it about a visiting dignitary's strange hat, or about how one of the hounds in the kennels had decided to adopt a stray cat.
You didn't expect it to care.
You weren't even sure it could hear you in whatever way dragons hear.
But you offered the thoughts all the same, because they filled the air, and because the corridor was a place where thoughts like that could live without interruption. Sometimes, when you left your post and climbed the long stairs to the upper halls, you felt as though you were stepping out of a different world.
The air upstairs was bright, quick-moving, full of voices and movement.
People passed without seeing you, the way a stream passes over stones without noticing their shape. You did your duties there, but part of you stayed in the corridor.
Part of you always did. You think now that the dragon's chamber is as much your home as your quarters are. You've walked the length of the corridor more times than you can count, each step etched into your muscles. You could close your eyes
and find your place without hesitation.
The place where the wall dips inward a fraction.
The place where the torchlight makes the stone floor look almost golden.
The place where the warmth is at its peak. And you know without doubt that the dragon is close to the door on the other side. Years from now, if you leave this post, you suspect you'll dream of it. Not in moments of excitement, no grand clashes, no sudden openings of the door, but in the slow, quiet way the light shifts on the stones, the weight of the spear in your hand,
the scent of hot metal and ancient wood,
the way time seemed to lose its sharp edges here. And perhaps you will wonder, in those dreams, whether the dragon ever notices your absence,
whether it will sense, in some slow and distant way, that the guard outside its chamber has changed, that a new tread echoes in the corridor. It's an odd thought, and not one you dwell on, for now you are here.
The torches burn. There is warm.
The door is still,
and the understanding between you and the unseen is steady and unbroken. You keep your watch. It keeps its silence, and in that long, quiet balance, you find peace. It is deep night in the corridor, though you wouldn't know it by the light.
Down here, the torches burn the same whether it's dawn or midnight, throwing their familiar glow across the stone, leaving the same slow-moving shadows.
And yet,
I can always tell there's a heaviness in the air at this hour, as if the castle above has gone to sleep and the weight of that slumber has drifted down into these lower halls. My spear is leaning against the wall beside me.
I haven't moved in what feels like hours, though my legs shift just enough to keep the blood flowing.
The heat from behind the door is steady tonight, not too fierce, not too faint.
That's the first sign that the dragon is in a deep, settled
rest.
I imagine it curled upon itself, wings folded, tail wrapped tight, breath rising and falling in great, slow intervals. When the dragon sleeps like this, the whole corridor seems to match its rhythm.
Even the torches crackle more softly, their flames swaying in a kind of unison. The sound of dripping water from far away I still haven't found exactly where it comes at such regular intervals. It feels almost deliberate, like the ticking of an unseen clock. I lean my head back against the cool stone behind me, feeling the texture press into my scalp. The wall is old, older than the door itself, and bears the faint hollows worn by countless years of God's doing, just as I am now. I imagine them people I've never met, never will meet, standing in the same spot, feeling the same heat, watching the same flicker of light. Some of them must have been impatient.
Some must have stared at the door and willed it to open, to bring them something to do.
I remember feeling that way myself when I first arrived. Now, the idea almost feels absurd.
The door's stillness is the very heart of this place.
Without it, the corridor would lose its quiet magic. Above me, somewhere far up the stairs, I think I hear the faintest hum of wind. There must be a draft pushing through the high windows of the upper halls. It doesn't reach here. The air in the corridor remains heavy and warm, but it reminds me that another world exists just a few flights above. Full of movement and chill night air, my mind drifts to the memory of walking outside on nights like this, the sky clear and sharp with stars, the breath visible before my face, the sound of boots crunching on frost.
I remember thinking, on those walks, how vast the world felt.
And now, in this enclosed space, I think of the opposite, how contained it can be, how every inch of stone can feel familiar. No, a faint
sound draws me back, not from behind the door, but from up the corridor.
It's the soft scrape of leather on stone, followed by the muted clink of metal.
Another guard on rounds, perhaps.
The sound grows, then stops as the figure comes into view.
It's Brenner, one of the newer men, his armor still shining with the kind of polish only rookies bother with. He nods at me as he passes, but doesn't
speak.
No one speaks much at this hour. Our voices would feel too loud here, like shouts in a library.
He moves on,
his footsteps fading into the same quiet they came from. Once he's gone, I take a moment to notice how the air has shifted.
Only slightly perhaps from his movement, but it's there, a brief stirring in the warmth, like the corridor exhaled and then returned to stillness. I let that sensation sit with me, thinking about how even the smallest disturbance can
feel momentous in this place. My thoughts wander again, back to a story an older guard once told me.
He'd been here for nearly 20 years, longer than anyone else I'd met.
He swore that once, on a night much like this, he'd heard a voice from behind the door.
Not a roar, not a growl, a voice, deep, slow, speaking words he couldn't understand.
He said it was like hearing a mountain speak, or the groan of a sheep's hull in a storm. I asked him if he'd been afraid. He said no, that it had felt strangely comforting, like the dragon wasn't speaking to him, but simply speaking, the way a river runs or a fire burns.
Just existing. I've never heard such a thing myself, though on certain nights, when the heat behind the door rises and falls more quickly, I've wondered if the dragon is dreaming, if dreams for creatures like that are as strange and shapeless as ours, or if they are as vast and sharp as their waking selves. The torches sputter, bringing me back.
I watch as one flame leans and then steadies, the light shifting in slow, liquid
movements across the stone.
I trace the path it takes across the iron bands of the door, over the grooves in the wall, pulling in a shallow depression in the floor where countless feet have stood. It's in moments like this that I feel the corridor breathing.
Not literally, of course, but in the way it changes so subtly, you'd miss it if you didn't stand here for hours on end.
A flicker of light here, a change in warmth there, the faint echo of something moving far away. I settle deeper into my stance, adjusting my grip on the spear.
The shaft is once smooth where my hands rest, polished by years of use. It feels as much a part of me as my own limbs. I can imagine standing here 100 more nights, the seasons above changing without ever touching me. And perhaps that is the truest part of this life. The world turns, storms come and go, rulers rise and fall, but here in the corridor, time drips slowly, one torch crackle at a time. I close my eyes for a moment, just to listen.
The heat hums against my skin, the stone cool against my back, the faint heartbeat of the place in every distant sound.
When I open them again, nothing has changed, and yet everything feels full. Another hour will pass like this,
and another,
until the relief comes, and I climb the stairs into the colder air above, carrying the warmth of the corridor with me like an ember in my chest.
It is deep night in the corridor, though you wouldn't know it from the light alone. Down here, the torches burn the same whether it's morning or midnight, each flame swaying gently in the still air, throwing their soft golden glow across the same stones they have for decades.
And yet, I can always tell.
There's a heaviness in the hour, a weight that settles over everything once the castle above has gone to sleep.
The stillness from those upper halls seems to drift down the stairwell and wrap itself around this place like an extra layer of silence.
The air is thick and warm, the kind of warmth that doesn't simply sit on your skin, but seems to reach inward, seeping into your bones until you forget what cool air feels like.
The heat is steady tonight, not the sharp, pulsing kind that
Comes when the dragon is restless, nor the faint, almost absent warmth that comes when it slips into some deep, unknowable slumber.
This is the middle ground.
the breathing warmth of a creature settled, content to remain still. I picture it, though I've never seen it resting just beyond that great wooden door. Cold perhaps, tail wrapped around itself, massive head, tucked low, wings folded in layers like a blanket pulled tight. I imagine the slow, rumbling breaths, each one a tide rolling in and out, each exhale sending out the faintest ripple of heat that finds its way through the cracks and seams of the door. The door itself is a presence as much as the dragon. I could trace its surface in my mind with perfect accuracy the way the iron bands arc across it, the tiny pits where the metal has been hammered flat, the grain of the ancient wood darkened over years until it's nearly black. At night, when the light falls just so, the door looks less like an object and more like a shadow, a dark, patient shape waiting for a reason to move. Tonight, though, it does not move. It simply stands there as it always does, the barrier between me and what lies beyond. And so I settle back into my post, my spear leaning lightly against my shoulder, my fingers idly finding the worn places on its shaft. The wood there is polished smooth from years of touch, the kind of texture that feels familiar without you needing to look.
The torch to my left crackles in a steady rhythm, its flame leaning slightly every so often before lighting itself. I've come to know that rhythm, the gentle hiss when a drop of sap catches fire, the soft pop when a bit of resin burns away.
These sounds are as much a part of the corridor as the stones underfoot. Somewhere in the far distance, a drop of water falls.
The sound is faint but precise, echoing along unseen channels in the stone.
It comes again, after a long pause, and again after that, never hurried, never random.
I've often wondered where exactly that water is coming from. A crack in the ceiling somewhere, a forgotten cistern. I've never gone to find out. Some mysteries are better left as part of the place, things you notice, things you live alongside, but never interrupt.
The wall behind me is cool against the back of my head when I lean against it, its uneven surface pressing lightly against my scalp.
These stones have stood for longer than any of us have kept watch here.
I sometimes think about how many others
Have stood exactly where I stand now, their eyes on the same door, their thoughts drifting in the same slow circles.
Some must have been impatient, shifting from foot to foot, staring at the hinges as if willing them to turn. Others, perhaps, were like me now, settled into the rhythm, at peace with the idea that nothing might happen for days, weeks, months.
My mind wanders, as it often does at this hour, to small memories. A festival I once attended in the courtyard above, where lanterns bobbed in the wind like tiny stars and music spilled down the stairs in faint, uneven waves.
The smell of bread, baking in the early morning, carried all the way down here by a chance draught. The time a visiting noble, dressed in armor too polished to have ever seen battle, demanded to be allowed past the door, and how quickly his bravado melted when told what was on the other side. Tonight, though, there are no visitors, no disturbances.
Only the endless quiet. From somewhere up the corridor comes a sound, leather scuffing lightly on stone, a faint clink of metal.
Another guard on their rounds, I think. The figure emerges slowly from the far end of the corridor, torchlight catching the edges of their armor.
It's Brenner, still new to the post, his gear too clean to polished.
He nods as he passes, his face half hidden in the shadow of his helmet. Neither of us speaks. At this hour, voices feel too sharp, too out of place. After he's gone, the
air feels subtly different, disturbed for a moment, then returning to its settled state.
I let the silence stretch, noticing how quickly the place absorbs any movement, how the heat and stone conspire to erase the traces of anyone passing through. I think again of a story told to me years ago by an older guard who'd been here longer than anyone else I'd met. He swore that, once, he'd heard the dragon speak, not a roar, not even a growl, but something like words, deep and slow, spoken in a language he couldn't understand.
He said it had felt less like being addressed and more like overhearing the earth itself shifting in its sleep.
I've never heard anything like it myself, though on certain nights, when the warmth behind the door grows stronger, I've wondered if perhaps the dragon dreams aloud,
The torch sways slightly as a faint draft works its way through the corridor,
carrying with it a scent that's hard to place, faintly metallic, faintly earthy, as if the dragon's breath itself has mingled with the air.
I draw it in slowly, letting it sit on my tongue before exhaling. My gaze drifts over the floor, tracing the shallow depressions worn by centuries of boots.
There's a comfort in those marks, proof that I'm part of something long and unbroken, a chain of watches stretching back further than I can see.
Sometimes I imagine all of us standing here at once, a line of guards fading into the distance, each keeping their silent vigil. The minutes pass unnoticed. That's the strange magic of this place. You lose track of time, not because it races
by, but because it smooths itself out, every moment blending into the next.
The pop of a torch,
the slow drip of water, the deep, steady warmth.
They become the clock by which you measure the night. I shift my stance, not because I'm uncomfortable, but because the movement feels right.
My boots make a muted sound on the stone, quickly swallowed by the air. I glance at the door once more, though there's no need. I know it's unchanged.
I always know, and so I stand, in the glow of the torches, in the company of heat and silence, the dragons sleeping beyond, the castle dreaming above.
And I think to myself that there are far worse ways to spend a life.
It is late, so late that the world above must be wrapped in darkness, but here in the corridor, the light has not changed. It never does. The torches burn with their soft, steady glow, whether it is morning or midnight, casting the same
familiar gold across the stone, throwing shadows that move only when the flames sway.
And yet, I can feel the hour, not by sight, not by sound, but by the weight in the air, the way the silence feels thicker, as if all the castle above has drawn one long breath and chosen not to let it go. The heat is constant tonight, the sort
of deep, even warmth that seeps into my bones. It is not the pressing, almost scorching heat that comes when the dragon shifts and stirs, nor the faint and distant warmth of its deepest sleeps.
This is a middle place,
balanced, the steady breathing
of something massive and alive beyond the door.
I picture it in my mind, as I so often do, the long body curled into itself, the tail looped around in a lazy arc, the rise and fall of the ribs beneath wings folded like heavy blankets.
I imagine the breath moving through its nostrils, slow
and deliberate, each exhale sending a ribbon of heat that drifts invisibly toward me. The door stands between us, as it always has.
I know it so well that I could close my eyes and trace every line of its surface, the broad curve of each iron band, the tiny hammer marks in the metal, the ridges in the ancient wood, where the grain has risen over centuries.
In the torchlight, the wood gleams in places and drinks the light in others, the whole surface alive in a subtle play of shadow. The hinges are silent tonight. They so rarely move that when they do, it feels like the whole world has shifted. The air in the corridor is thick, holding onto every sound. The torches crackle, a soft and uneven music, their flames leaning now and then before swaying upright again, far away, so far that I cannot tell exactly where a drop of water falls, and then another, and another, at an unhurried pace. The sound is sharp but hollow, echoing along unseen channels in the stone until it is just part of the background, like the slow, steady beat of a heart. I lean back against the wall and feel the cool stone press into the back of my skull. It
is a familiar pressure. The wall is uneven, worn in places by the heads and shoulders of those who have stood watch before me.
Generations of guards, each with their own thoughts, their own rhythms, their own ways of passing the long hours. I sometimes wonder if they felt the same quiet satisfaction I do now, or if they counted the minutes, longing for the change of shift.
I was like that once, restless, impatient.
I wanted something to happen.
Now I find comfort in the fact
that nothing does. A flicker in the corner of my eye draws my gaze down the corridor.
A figure approaches slow, measured steps, the faint scrape of leather on stone. It is Brenner, the newest of us, his armor still bright in a way that marks
him as untested. He gives a small nod as he passes, his eyes lingering on the door for a moment before he moves on.
I do not speak, and neither does he.
At this hour, words feel out of place, too sharp for the heavy air.
His footsteps fade, and the silence folds
itself neatly back into place. When you stand here long enough, you start to notice the smallest changes, the way the warmth shifts ever so slightly when someone passes, the moment when a torch burns a little brighter before settling again. Even
the air has a texture sometimes dense and still, sometimes faintly stirred by an invisible current.
Tonight it is heavy, unmoving, as if the corridor itself is asleep. I think of the old guard who told me, years ago, that he once heard the dragon speak. Not roar, not growl, but speak, in a voice so deep it felt like the stone itself was carrying the sound. He did not understand the words, if they were words at all, but he said it was less like being addressed and more like overhearing a mountain shifting in its sleep. I have never heard such a thing, though there are nights when the heat changes so subtly, or the door seems to hum in a way I cannot explain, and I wonder if perhaps he was telling the truth. The torch nearest the door sways slightly, sending light rippling across the iron bands. The shadows change shape, stretching and bending in ways that make the door look almost alive.
I follow those shadows with my eyes, tracing them across the floor, up the opposite wall, back to the rough arch
Of the ceiling,
I let my gaze linger on each line of stone until I feel as though I have memorized them anew. Sometimes, to pass the time, I imagine all the guards who have stood here before me as if they were standing here still, a long, unbroken line fading
into the past, each holding a spear, each watching the same door.
In my mind, they are as quiet as I am now, their breaths blending with mine until the whole corridor seems to exhale together. The minutes pass without shape or weight.
Time here is not marked by clocks or bells, but by the quiet cycle of sensations. The warmth against my skin, the flicker of flame, the slow rhythm of my own breathing. A faint scent reaches me, metallic and dry, like the air after a forge has been left to cool. It comes from behind the door, riding on some subtle shift in the dragon's breath. I draw it in slowly, letting it sit on my tongue before I exhale. I think again of the world above. At this hour, the castle must be silent, the great hall empty, the courtyards lit only by the moon. I picture the high towers against the sky, the thin clouds drifting past, the cold air sharp enough to make your breath visible. It is another world entirely, yet only a handful of stairs away. And still, I have no urge to go there. Here, in the corridor, in the steady warmth and low light, I feel as though I am exactly where I belong. The drop of water falls again, and again.
I count the spaces between, knowing they will not change.
The constancy is a comfort. I adjust my grip on the spear, my fingers finding the polished spots worn by years of use. The wood is warm from my hand, smooth in some places, faintly ridged in others. I wonder how many more years it will take before every part of it is as polished as those spots, and so I stand, in the torchlight, in the warmth, with the dragon, sleeping beyond the door. The night stretches ahead, long and unbroken, but not empty. There is a fullness to the quiet here, a weight that settles in the chest and makes you feel anchored. Above, the world turns. Here, time rests. There are stretches of time in the corridor when the hours don't feel like steps on a path, but like circles traced gently in the same patch of dust. You stand, you breathe, you listen, and then you do those things again, slower, softer, as if the air itself has asked you to whisper, even with your body. Tonight is one of those stretches. If you ask me whether it's nearer to midnight or to dawn, I would tilt my head like I was listening for a bell far away, and then tell you the truth. Down here, the question doesn't matter. The torches hold their patient halos. The stones keep their counsel. The door does what it always does, exists, heavy and sure, between me and whatever dreams coil on the other side. I adjust my grip on the spear, not because I need to, but because a familiar motion can be as calming as a lullaby. The shaft has the same polished patches it had yesterday, and the day before, and the year before that. The wood remembers every hand that has stood in this spot. If you slide your palm slowly along it, you can feel the gentle changes in texture. Where a thumb once worried the grain, where a knuckle rested when someone leaned, where sweat darkened the wood in a long-vanished summer. I sometimes think the spear could tell the story of this corridor better than any of us, one touch at a time, furnished by attention. The heat tonight is even and low, the way an oven feels after the baker has finished for the day, and the loaves have already gone to table. It breathes through the stone in a way that is almost musical, a rise that is not a crescendo, a fall that is not a silence. Step close to the door, and you feel it gather at your shins. Step back, and it floats up to your chest as if it prefers to follow rather than to lead. I have learned that when the air behaves like this, the dragon is in the long, restful part of sleep, not the twitching dream phase, not the watchful doze that comes before it decides to shift its hoard by a few inches. This is the deep sea of slumber, smooth at the surface, fathoms of warmth below. Somewhere to my right, a torch lets out a brief hiss as a pocket of resin surrenders. It's the smallest of sounds, but in the corridor, small things are allowed to be important.
I can tell you which torches tend to do that, and at what point in their life they're most talkative.
New torches are shy.
Old torches sigh.
There is one halfway down the wall that burns a little bluer than the rest, and another near the stairs that always seems to lean left no matter how carefully you straighten it. These are facts with no consequence except that they keep me company.
In a world that asks me to hold still and hold watch, I have made a garden of tiny certainties. The floor tells its own quiet story.
The flagstones are worn in the places that make perfect sense beneath the torches, before the door, in the shallow bend where a person naturally turns, and also in places that don't. There's a soft hollow near the far wall that could only
Have been made by a habit, I can't guess. Did a guard pace there, counting footsteps under breath, stopping always at the exact same spot to think a thought best thought alone?
Did a servant once set a bucket there, day after day, in an age when there were more people in the lowest halls?
When my eyes are tired, I let them rest on those pale scoops in the stone and imagine ghosts wearing them deeper with the weight.
Of patience, it's a night for remembering,
Not because anything has stirred to prompt it, but because sometimes stillness opens drawers you didn't know were in your mind.
I remember my first week on this post, the nervous energy that ran from shoulder to ankle, the way my heartbeat seemed to outpace the torchlight as if it wanted to dash down the corridor and be done. I remember the moment a veteran put a hand lightly on the butt of my spear and pushed it a finger's width down. "You're here for hours," he said, voice soft as soot.
Make room for breath. He was right.
I did not understand then. That breath is the measure we use when clocks are absent. I think, too, of the old captain with the voice like gravel in a barrel. You used to visit once a season just to stand beside me and say nothing at all. He claimed to be listening for structure, which sounded mysterious until I realized he meant what I had already begun to hear, the way the corridor contains its sounds. How the door's quiet is not the same as a wall's quiet. How the
heat hums at a pitch your ears can almost catch. How a footstep on the first stair 10 flights up will arrive down here as a faint suggestion rather than a fact.
"That's a fortress," he said once, nodding at the door. "Not the stone, the way the sound behaves."
On nights like this, I make inventory not of the armory kind, with quills and ledgers, but a list in the head of the corridor's small reliables.
The notch in the second iron band where a blacksmith's hammer struck partly sideways, the hairline,
Crack above the hinge that never grows, no matter the season.
The small, almost invisible nail in the torch bracket that sticks out a fraction more than its brothers.
the stale sweetness that arrives in the air on baking days, the whisper of ash when it settles along the edge of the sill, a speck of mica,
No bigger than the head of a pin, glimmering on the floor where the light catches it just so.
These things do not add up to anything, and yet they add up to everything that keeps a person gentle. I let a memory of the market drift in to sit beside the torchlight. The way spring apples smell when the first crates are opened, wood damp and
Fruit bright, a woman selling needles who always hums under her breath.
cloth stacked like slices of sunset terracotta, marigold, grows so vivid you almost taste color. It's not that I miss the market when I stand my watch, it's that I enjoy the contrast.
outside is a river.
Here is a lake at dawn.
Both are water, and both will teach you how to look. A quiet scuff at the edge of hearing leather on stone. Patient even announces the approach of another guard.
I don't turn my head at once.
In the corridor, you let the sound arrive before.
You greet it, the way you might let a breeze cool you before you comment on the weather.
It's Lysa this time, with her tidy braids and her habit of smiling with her eyes when she's pleased by your stillness.
She stops beside me for a handful of breaths.
We say nothing because what is there to update?
The dragon sleeps. The torches behave. The door remains exactly as it has always been. Present, potential, and content to keep its own counsel. She squeezes my shoulder as if fastening me to the moment and moves on, her steps shrinking until the corridor swallows them politely. If you listen long enough, you start to hear your own body as part of the place. The linen of the gambeson shifts.
Like a small sigh with each inhale.
The edge of a buckle ticks the wood of the spear when you breathe a little deeper than usual. Your heartbeat sets a slow metronome behind the ribs, steady as a craftsman's hand. In another setting, these would be forgettable. Here, they are another layer of the song. I let my thoughts wander, but not far. They go to a story told by someone
Who claimed their grandmother had once kept bees beyond the outer wall. Bees, in a place like this, imagine it.
Honey like sunlight collected in bottles.
The low companionable music of wings.
I think about how a hive organizes itself, each creature purposeful and unhurried, and I decide that I know why the story stuck with me. The corridor is a hive in winter, quiet and warm. The queen asleep, the guards at the entrance agreeing without. Words to wait as long as it takes. The dragon's breath shifts a subtle change, a deeper exhale. It's not louder, it's not brighter, it's only different in the way a page is different once the ink has dried.
I notice and do what the corridor has taught me to do with every notice. I let the awareness settle, like ash, and then become part of the floor.
Nothing else follows.
The heat returns to its previous hum.
A torch gives a single pop.
A mote. Something drifts in the light, makes a slow arc, and vanishes. Sometimes I imagine letters to myself that I will never write. You stood here and learned the grammar of patience. One might begin. You learned that a door can be a teacher, and that a creature you do not see can become a kind of geography. Another might say, you learn the difference between
waiting for and waiting with. It is a soft difference, but it governs the soul. The first is hungry, the second is fed. A memory scratches at the door of thought and is let in. The day the hinges were oiled.
It happens rarely, and when it does, the whole castle listens without announcing that it's listening. The blacksmith and the steward came with rags and a little pot of something that smelled of seed and smoke. The hinges did not groan. They
sighed, as if a stiffness were leaving old bones.
The dragon did not stir. The door drank, and then it was done, and the corridor felt newly brushed, like hair set right by a careful hand. I remember the way the oil caught the light dark along the lowest edge, bright where it thinned, and how for days afterward I could still catch a thread of the scent, hidden beneath the steady metal tang that never leaves. I walked 3 slow
paces toward the stairs and 3 slow paces back, not because I am restless, but because the body appreciates a little kindness when the mind has been still for so long.
The stones receive the weight of my steps with their usual courtesy.
My shadow keeps me company, lengthening and shrinking as the torch nearest the door wavers. When I stand in the center of my post again, the corridor feels as if it has nodded at me. Welcome back, as if I had been far.